from this group. So a few months ago, there was an article in the Deseret News with this headline: "Why Utah has a once-in-a-generation opportunity unique to any other place in the world." That headline kind of came from some real estate experts that have weighed in on this site and said that it's really unusual to have nearly 700 acres, really kind of a blank slate, in the heart of one of the fastest growing metropolitan areas in the country, and in the heart of a burgeoning high-tech sector in Silicon Slopes. It presents an opportunity which also puts on our shoulders a significant responsibility to make sure that we take advantage of this responsibility and this opportunity for the benefit of the state. Now, as you know, we're talking about the correctional facility in Draper. Again, about 700 acres. You can see from this video that prison site covers part of the land, but it also includes all this undeveloped area out to Bangerter Highway and over to Bluffdale. So real opportunities there. The legislature established some clear objectives for our organization in developing this site. We wanted us to maximize job creation, do our part to ensure that Utah has a highly trained workforce. Quality of life is a big deal, so not just on the site, but in surrounding areas. There was emphasis on balanced residential and commercial growth, essentially having a jobs housing balance that would allow people to live and work in this area and not have to travel as much, kind of a nod to the transportation challenges in the area. Preserving natural lands, enhancing recreational opportunities. This ought to be a place where people can gather and enjoy being together, a place where you might go and have a nice meal, where you would listen to street musicians or a concert, where some of the regional trails are connected. Think connecting Bonneville Shoreline Trail through the site to the Jordan River Parkway Trail, something like that. Improving air quality and minimizing resource use. So the legislature wants us to look at ways that we can minimize air pollution, energy use, water use, make sure that we're dealing with water quality issues. Transportation infrastructure. I think this is absolutely crucial. As I've talked to hundreds of people, there is really broad support for development of this site, but also almost universal concern about traffic in this area. So we're looking at working very closely with our transportation agencies within the context of the Regional Transportation Plan, Unified Transportation Plan, and making sure that we've got a good transit and road system. Next one is we want to be good neighbors. We know that we're right next to neighborhoods in Draper and Bluffdale. Lehigh is close, Riverton, South Jordan, etc. We need to be working very closely with those entities to ensure that what we do enhances what they're trying to accomplish and doesn't create unintended consequences. And interestingly, the legislature asked us to explore a nationally recognized research center, a place where the universities are involved, where we can generate innovative ideas and help solve social problems, where we can stimulate economic activity in the state. The legislation establishes a board to oversee this authority. Currently, we have two co-chairs, Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox and State Representative Lowry Snow. Now, some would say, why in the world is Lowry Snow, who represents the Washington County area, on a board dealing with the Point of the Mountain area? And one of the reasons is that he's just a great guy, has some legal background in the development process. But I think it's also a recognition that this is a statewide project. that we're seeking to benefit people throughout the state through what happens here, whether it's through revenues to state and local governments that can be used for education and infrastructure and services throughout the state, whether it's through creating a model development that can be followed in other parts of the state and help address growth challenges there, or just putting Utah on kind of the map as being able to address growth challenges in a thoughtful way. Other members of the board: Mayor Don Ramsey from South Jordan, Senator Jerry Stevenson, Representative Steve Handy, Jim Russell, whom you've met with DFCM, Val Hale, the Governor's Office of Economic Development, Commissioner Dave Wolstenhume, who is the Commissioner of Higher Education, emphasizing again the importance of education at this site, Senator Lincoln Fillmore, who represents area near the site, Mayor Troy Walker, again from Draper, and April Cooper, who is the CEO and president of Alpine Companies, a real estate firm in Utah County. The board's established some guiding principles to help us as we make decisions. And the first of those is promote the public interest. We want to emphasize that this is state property, which means that all of us share ownership of the site. And we want to do something that is valuable to the public ahead of any personal or individual interests. That's a commitment. Next is set the standard. We don't want just a mundane development here. We want to set a high standard for development that can be a model for others, an iconic development. Next is think regionally. This is a 700-acre site, and if we focus solely on this site, we're going to miss out on opportunities, and we may create unintended problems. So we want to work broadly with the regional organizations and the communities in the region to make sure that, I think as Ted said earlier, we're creating the region we want to live. Next is take the long view. Often development projects are spurred by the need to pay off debt and the burden of carrying that debt load. We've got the advantage of being a state site, not having that debt load. And while we want to see progress quickly, we also have the luxury of taking a little bit more time and making sure that we do this right. We want this to be a project that matters decades from now and is future focused. Next, be open and transparent. Again, public project, so the public needs to know what's happening and be involved. And in that regard, just probably need to emphasize that this meeting is being recorded. We're taking notes, and it'll be on the website. So just so you're aware of that, but we want everybody to know what's going on and not be surprised. Finally, and just critically, we're committed to acting with integrity. We will not compromise that principle, and we're going to represent the public well. So those are the principles that guide us. Let me step back a few years. Mayor Walker, who's on the Point of the Mountain Development Commission board, mentioned that the Development Commission, which was formed in 2016, did an awful lot of public outreach and put together a consulting team coordinated by Envision Utah, and I think involved well over 4,000 people in providing input on the Point of the Mountain region. So broader than the prison site. Kind of think the area from, say Sandy to Saratoga Springs. And they took that information, developed alternative scenarios for how the region could grow, including some ideas for the Draper Correctional Facility site. And there was broad public consensus around scenarios D and E, which helped form the principles around the visioning document that came out of that multi-year process. Most of you, I think, have seen this. This is the regional vision for that point of the mountain area. You can see the prison site kind of right there in the middle. There was an effort to identify some transportation solutions. Many of those have been included in the transportation plans. But importantly, there were a number of principles that came out of that public effort. First was we wanted to see jobs in a highly trained workforce. On the environmental side, improving air quality and reduced resource use, connecting trails, having parks and open space be an important part of it. Community design with vibrant urban centers, jobs and housing close by, so we minimize the need to commute. Variety of community and housing options. On transportation, that was a big focus. Recognition that there was a need for more north-south connections through that narrow area of the point of the mountain. Looking at connected street networks so that we're not funneling all the traffic onto a few arterials or freeways, but there are multiple ways for people to get where they need to go. World-class public transit, and there's an active process underway now to explore the right way to get transit through this site and into Utah County. And then looking east-west at some of those very challenging east-west transportation issues at the same time. And finally, there was a focus on the prison site, wanting it to be a catalytic center that would drive innovative development in the region, and then research and university presence. You may have noticed, as I did, that those principles, those vision themes that came out of the public process are exactly the themes that are listed in the legislation for guiding the Point of the Mountain State Land Authority. I think that says a lot. The legislature listened to the public and incorporated those themes in law to guide our efforts. I will say that research that was done primarily by RC Elko, who's our real estate advisor, said that if we build the region consistently with the vision, it would have real benefits relative to baseline growth. Things like increasing public revenues by 2050 from 12 billion to 19.7 billion. So significant public monies for services and education and infrastructure. That it would add $10,000 to the average annual household income on the Wasatch Front. So you think about that. By 2050, $10,000 in every household on the Wasatch Front, and certainly impacts beyond that. And also reduced travel times for those traveling through the region relative to the baseline. All right, let's turn to these working groups and what we're trying to accomplish and kind of what we anticipate your role to be. We have 5 working groups. This is the 4th that has met this week, and we have another one this afternoon. There's a stakeholder group that is composed primarily of elected officials in the area, helping us be the eyes and ears of the public, make sure that we are reflecting interests of the public. Next is education, research, and innovation. We talked about the direction that we explore research and innovation at this site. So that's a group composed of universities, especially their tech transfer and research arms. It's heavily represented by people from biotech and high tech in the state, and others who are helping us think through what a innovation district at this site would look like. And we anticipate that at least part of the site will be a district which will create an ecosystem where ideas can be further explored, commercialized, companies built, and feeding into mature companies. Yesterday, we met with the Environment and Air Quality Group. There's folks from the state, some of our conservation groups in the state, thinking about ways that we can meet that mandate of improving air quality and minimizing resource use. Then this group, which I think is just vital. I mean, you're providing input on the master planning process that we're going to be undertaking this next year. We're not going to ask you to plan the site because we'll have a planning team that will do that. We're going to ask you to come up with key priorities and ideas. Help us think through the key themes that we need to address in terms of infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, water infrastructure, wastewater, et cetera, and land use principles that will help us meet those goals of having some open space, having a balance of live-work opportunity, attracting some of the best companies around the world. So while today might be a little bit more of a general discussion and trying to brainstorm without too many constraints, we very quickly will want to be working with you to identify a handful of top priorities that need to feed into the RFP, RFQ process, things that we would like our planning team to address. We'll then be asking you to get a little bit more involved in the master planning process in evaluating drafts that come out. And then this afternoon, we'll meet with the Economic Development, Recruitment, and Investment Group, helping to advance that legislative directive that we generate economic activity for the state. We recruit some of the best international companies to this area, and we find some investment that can supplement public dollars in making this happen. So this is my last slide, and it's kind of a timeline of where things have gone from when the Prison Relocation Commission was first formed to today and beyond. We've talked a little bit about the Point of the Mountain Development Commission and the work they've done. Jim and his team are actively constructing the new facility out near the airport. The projection is that that will be finished kind of mid-2022, so a couple of years from now. That's not a lot of time between now and then to figure out what's next at this site. So I was the Point of the Mountain State Land Authority was created by the legislature in 2018. I was hired about a year ago. We've been kind of laying the organizational foundation. We got our first appropriation in this last session. Bless their hearts, the legislature, while buying back a little of that money in the special session, left us with the resources we need to move forward over the next couple of years. And so in terms of the timeline for this working group, we expect that we'll meet once a month, fourth Thursday of the month at this time. We will probably try to meet monthly for the next year or so. We'll adjust based on need and try not to occupy any more of your time than needed. There may be opportunities for some conversations between the meetings as we try to put together materials to discuss collectively. But I think our first goal over the next 2 or 3 months will be to provide input on the RFP process and what we want the skill set of our planning team to be and what we want them to focus on. Then over the winter, we'll probably have you working on recommendations that we can feed into that planning team. And then over the spring of next year, as the master plan comes together, we'll probably want your input on refinements, whether the plan is meeting the goals that have been set out. So that's kind of where we are. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have about this process, your role, etc.
Hey, Alan, I do have one question for you. This is Ross Dinsdale with Lehigh City. One of the things that we've actually run into already is that we're developing on the west side of Lehigh. There's a lot of development going on, and MAG and Envision Utah's latest plan shows a road connecting north from Lehigh up to this area. There's, I guess that road is showed as a potential planned route, but what we're hearing from Camp Williams is that that's not going to happen. They have different plans. So I guess the question is there someone coordinating with, or someone from Camp Williams that's going to be giving input in this group?
That's a good question. We don't have anybody from Camp Williams on this committee, but to the extent they have influence off the side, and I know they do, we need to be in contact with them. So I wasn't aware that they've weighed in on that potential north-south route. So I'm appreciative of your raising that issue.
Okay. Yeah.
Sean at MAG, this is Grant. Do you have an update on that? It was going to be like an update to their joint land use study, and Camp Williams was participating at some level for funding. Anyway, MAG was involved with that at one point.
Yeah, I don't know.
Hey, Alan, this is Jim. Can I suggest, because of the number of people on here, that maybe each of you go up to the comment section and type in your name if you have a question or a comment, because of the number of people that we have, and then we can make sure we get everybody's questions or concerns. But maybe we can take a few minutes and just direct the questions particularly to the process and the things that you presented the last few minutes, the vision and the process and the goals and vision of this particular committee. Maybe get that out of the way before we start talking about what everybody's initial thoughts or concerns are.
It looks like Andrew had a comment or question.
Yeah.
Thanks, Alan, and thanks, Jim. Yeah, to the process, one question and one comment, I suppose. The question is on the, Alan, you said RFP, RFQ for a planning team, and maybe you could just expand a little bit on what you envision the role of that planning team. I'm taking it to mean that what we're talking about is the development of the master plan for the development itself, and that you'd be looking to bring in a consulting team to do that. And I think that, particularly on the transportation and land use piece of that, of course, there would be value in having great collaboration between that planning team and the planners that are part of this group here. So I would just assume that would in some way be baked into the process, and I'm sure that I could offer up the assistance from any of the planners in this group, and that would be true for everybody here. So maybe you could expand on that a little bit. And then the comment that I have is something that many of us are very familiar with, and Alan, we've talked about, which is that the transportation agencies, of course, have a regular and ongoing planning process for transportation that takes into consideration land use development patterns and preferences at the local level. And we will need to pay attention to the parallel processes for the point of the mountain as well as for the regular transportation planning. And I think to this point, as you noted before, Alan, we've done collectively a good job of having those processes inform each other and therefore make them both better. And I would just state an intention and an offer. And again, I'm sure that I'm speaking for WFRC, MAG, UDOT, UTA, all the transportation agencies and folks here, that it would be our expectation that the work done by the Point of the Mountain group would continue to be incorporated into and would help shape and inform the official transportation plans as they go forward. So I almost feel like it goes without saying to say it, but I want to just be clear up front that that is definitely our plan and intention, is to have those processes woven together in a way that informs and makes them both be better and more effective on achieving the outcomes. So then, Alan, back to the question, though, if that I raised, if you would, please.
Yeah, and thank you. And it doesn't go without saying, I think we need to be explicit that we will continue to try to work within the existing processes. Not going to go rogue on you here, and want to make sure that we are communicating very closely as we plan. So to your question, and Steve Kellenberg is here, and he can weigh in a little bit more if you'd like. We just, as I said, are bringing him on in real time right now to help us work through that RFP, RFQ process. We want to bring in a very strong planning team to develop the master plan for this site. We will target specific firms around the world. We'll go through some kind of a competitive process, maybe a design competition, we'll see. And part of that process, yes, will include an expectation that they work within the regional planning processes that we have here. Now they're going to be working specifically on the site, what goes where, and putting together that master plan. But in doing so, it's going to be important that it fits within the broader context. So
I would just, I mean, you invited me to say something, so I better say something, I guess. Just 2 points come to mind. One is, you know, I don't know if you all realize the inspiration that the Envision Utah process over the decades has provided to the rest of the country in terms of regional level, you know, strategic thinking, with a focus on having transportation actually lead land use instead of the other way around. I mean, most of the time stuff gets developed and then you try and figure out how the roads work, and half the time they don't. And what you all did with your envisioning process is create a model where the two are highly integrated and work in simpatico and lead to a robust, balanced transportation system, hopefully, more so than what occurs in other places. So the spirit of that, I think, obviously, you know, really needs to trickle down into this project to where transportation drives urban form, not the other way around necessarily, or at least together. The second point is the process that we're going to start to define will, you know, look at a fully integrated planning team that not just a land planner, but an integrated team that will have transportation and infrastructure and market and all the different components that really need to talk to each other to create a fully functional integrated master plan. And I wrote it down immediately that, you know, this, whoever ends up taking the lead on this team for transportation, part of their scope will definitely need to be to reach out to these multiple levels and multiple agencies that you represent. And it's going to be some work and it'll create some headaches, but that has to happen because it's a very complex transportation environment, as you've already pointed out.
yeah.
Great, thank you.
I see that Soren had a question. I anticipate there will be some overlapping conversations, themes among the other working groups. Will there be opportunities to cross-pollinate ideas between these work groups? Yes. Yeah, you can imagine that the work of the air quality and environment team and looking at ways to minimize single occupancy vehicle driving, maybe bring in some electric vehicle infrastructure, would overlap with the transportation planning that you'll be helping with. You can see as the economic development and the research pieces, think about an innovation district and what that means. That'll have relevance to the overall layout of this property. So we do anticipate that there will be some cross-pollination we would anticipate that as we move forward and start identifying priorities in each of these individual groups, we'll identify those areas of overlap and maybe put together some subcommittees or joint meetings as necessary to kind of work through that.
It looks like that's all the questions we have for the first question you posed, Alan. Would it be appropriate to move forward to just get some views on the initial vision for the site?
Yeah, I think the next question is kind of just getting your initial thoughts on what ought to be at this site. We've heard a lot of things from a lot of people. I'll just share with you that I was up at the Capitol one day during the session, and in a 5-minute period, I had 3 people come up and tell me what the future of the site should be. And one said, all electric city of the future. And that was the lobbyist from Rocky Mountain Power. The next was Disneyland, Utah. We tired of driving to Southern California. Let's bring Disneyland here. And I thought about how nice it would be to ride Splash Mountain in January. And then the third was all agriculture. And that was a representative from the Farm Bureau. So my point is lots of ideas that are out there. We're not going to be all things to all people, but we do have kind of a direction towards mixed use, focus on some innovation, et cetera. But we would love to hear some of your initial ideas, just so we can brainstorm freely for a little while.
Well, Alan, when I was younger, I watched the Jetsons, and now we're in their day. Right, it's arrived. So it's probably going to be somewhere between the Jetsons and agriculture, but not agriculture.
I think you're right.
Nobody has any ideas. That's pretty good.
Yeah, and I know it's tough with a group this big. So I think I'd just, chime in, and we'll do our best to manage avoiding speaking over each other.
If somebody has an idea, go ahead, and then while they're speaking, if someone else wants, just let us know, and then we'll make sure everybody gets heard.
Alan, let me, and Jim, let me maybe throw a couple out there for discussion. And, these are obviously ones that are closely related to some of the work that we do with the Jordan River Commission. The first one is, and a lot of people forget that we have over a third of our population. It might even be higher in Draper because it's a family-friendly city, but over a third of our population that doesn't drive. They tend to be mostly our young kids, early teens and youth. But we also have people with physical limitations, with health-related limitations, maybe older residents and aging residents. And that statistic comes when you look at the total population of the state and you look at the number of licensed drivers, which are both readily available statistics. So, we tend to not invest and think a lot about our non-driving population. There have been some good roads, if you will, into better addressing active transportation and transportation opportunities for people that don't drive for whatever reason. And I think that I'd love to see that, if we're looking at this as a model, to see that really at the forefront, thinking about, persons with disabilities, kids, aging residents, people that are going to be working in service sectors that may have income limitations on having, an automobile to use as their primary way to get to and from work. So I know those factors are already in kind of the comprehensive look at this area, but as we start to dive into the details, that's often where, on the implementation of those details, where the big ideas often don't get fully executed. So that's one that I would throw out that's always been, kind of near and dear to my heart. The other one is just thinking about the front line of defense on water quality, and I'm wearing very my Jordan River hat right now at the forefront of my thoughts, and that is the streets, the curbs, gutters, sidewalks, parking lots are always our first line of defense. I know in the vision the Jordan River plays in a lot to part of that quality of life. It's a natural resource that is growing in popularity and access as neighborhoods are being developed in Utah County and Salt Lake County near the Jordan River, and people see it as just an incredible amenity. We have some challenges here. One is this area is separated from the Jordan River by a railroad line, front runner and heavy rail. That create some real barriers. And so thinking about connectivity to this regional resource means that we have to find ways to get around those very real safety barriers, like a high-speed rail system that serves important purposes as well. But the streets themselves play a huge role in water quality, because right now every curb, gutter, sidewalk, street, rooftop mostly drains to the Jordan River. And thinking about how we mimic nature and get water and snow that fall to the earth into the earth rather than just running off and going somewhere, and we don't often think about where that somewhere is, but usually it's our creeks and our rivers and lakes. And we're seeing huge impacts from that. The algal blooms that we're seeing increase in frequency and severity are directly related to stormwater and the nutrient loads that come from heavy stormwater runoff. So, we don't often think about what the water does when we're thinking about where the streets and transportation systems go. But I just want to plant that seed that as we're thinking about road networks and streets and transportation systems, that we think beyond the conveying of people, but we also think about the conveyance of water and other natural resources and how we can mimic what nature would do, which is put it into the ground close to where it falls and work that into our plans as well.
Yeah, thanks, Soren. That idea came up in our meeting yesterday with the Air and Environment Group. So I think
Did it? Okay, fantastic.
That's great.
Looks like Grant has a comment.
Grant told me that he was going to have to leave early for another meeting, so he may have signed off.
We've left. So it looks like he said the regional road connectivity between Bangerter, Porter Rockwell, 146 South, with room to accommodate transit and active transportation as well. So I guess that's some of his visions or ideas for this development. Concerns.
Yeah. I know that's a big issue for Bluffdale, wanting to get traffic off of 146 South, so wanting to see a connection to Bangerter Highway through the site.
Alan, this is Christina Oliver. I never listen to the rules and don't follow them. So one of the things that we're really concerned with is ensuring that all of the surrounding cities' capital improvement plans line up with what we are going to build in a strategic manner at the site. A lot of water quality projects, our infrastructure projects in general, are ongoing, and our master transportation plans are updated on a frequent basis. I would love to see this group be able to have, and perhaps it's someone on your team, Alan, gather all that information and ensure that we're not operating in our silos, so that Draper City, and this is an extreme example, isn't building a two-way road onto a four-way highway in whatever actions we're doing. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
There's also the question of working on the UTA property and on the eBay properties. Years ago, there were certain things that came up during the development process, such as archaeological findings. There are a variety of geotech issues that are going to occur on this particular site. I want to make sure that we don't throw out into the public pictures of beautiful buildings and later come to find out that there are certain constraints that the site itself can't accommodate. So doing the basic groundwork is, in my personal opinion, the most important thing that we could do as a group to ensure that we're not setting ourselves up for failure in the public if we find out that we can't build something that we thought we could.
Yeah, thanks, Christina. And, I will mention to you, we've had an engineering group do a site survey and look at archaeological, environmental, wetlands, underground utilities, a little bit of soil work, et cetera, historical buildings. And fortunately, we haven't found any material barriers, but there will be more detailed work, especially the geotech, that'll need to be done as we get closer to planning. So that's a really important comment. Thanks.
So, Alan, our master planning consultant that we will be hiring is to bring all of this together, not to, I just want to emphasize, not to go off on our own and design what we think the site needs to be and how it should be, what the connectivity and infrastructure should look like. We're really bringing them on board to bring all of this together. So I think that everybody's concerns are valid and they'll be heard and coordinated as we move forward. I just want to make sure everybody understands that, you know, that's kind of the point of our consultant, is to bring this all, to glean all the information and bring it all together in a coordinated effort. It looks like, Ross, you had some addressed the issues by Soren, or had some additional ideas there.
Yeah, just a thought that, you know, this is going to be an area, you know, specifically thinking about wastewater, it's going to generate a lot. And, you know, the Jordan River has certain limits. There's not many other areas to discharge to. Provo recently did a project where they're doing groundwater recharge. Yeah, anyway, just thinking about some of the comments he made about the Jordan River, that could be a good option to start looking at.
I believe over by the Jordan River, though, Alan, isn't that where our conservation area is, where we have a sizable chunk of property that we can't develop on, that we'll have to turn into a park or a parkway, maybe a, you know, water feature in there? There might be ways to address these issues within the site itself.
Yes, and there is some conservation area close by, just off the site. We had some of this discussion yesterday. We're talking about the Jordan Basin wastewater treatment facility, which is close by, and a couple of others, and the opportunity potentially for using treated wastewater on this site. So we can look at both on-site and off-site treatment and use.
But Ted has a question.
Yes, thanks. This is such a, making sure I'm unmuted. I always have that problem. This is such a challenging effort, and I'm so grateful that there's so many experts involved here. My question is, so there's the prison land itself and the master planning of it. There's the coordination with adjacent communities, and I'm, you know, have good confidence that that will happen in terms of major facilities. There's certainly the regional infrastructure questions, including transit. We've talked a little bit about some of the environmental questions. Here is my, I'm actually getting to the point now. If we're laying out a process questions, there's the process of, you know, identifying the team and how they proceed relative to the prison land itself. There are the components of the regional infrastructure questions already underway. It's that middle scale that I'm wondering about, and relative to process, not substance. I wonder if there is an appetite, or even if there is a need, to think about some of the questions like, how does the land use program of the prison site affect nearby communities? What are the opportunities that are presented, new markets that are actually created for the land around the prison because of the prison site that may not be contemplated currently in existing general plans. That may extend not just from land use questions, but also transportation questions, new concepts for connectivity, new trail opportunities, or what have you. And I'm not intending to weigh in on the substance of how that might unfold, but I think if we map out, if there's a desire, if we map out how do we work together, adjacent communities with the prison site in a way that creates complementarity, I think that's a word. And you know, we're not cannibalizing each other's opportunities. We're building on things. We're creating good synergy, and we're kind of taking advantage of the catalyst that the prison site is. And it's not just we don't look back in 20 years and say, gosh, it's too bad we have just this amazing development on the prison site. Could we have done better to create greatness in the land that surrounds it? And that we really think about those kinds of opportunities as well. I know that the communities are working on that, and I'm coming at this question from a lack of knowledge about the particular coordination that might be happening between communities. But I acknowledge that, and I think we all should be acknowledging that there are going to be some new opportunities, new ways of thinking that we could not have thought about until, you know, perhaps later steps down the line. So hopefully that made some sense, and we can think through what are those process components that really knit together the land around the prison site.
Yeah.
Important point. We've got to be looking at those boundary connectivity issues and gateway issues and beyond. You know, it's something we've talked about but haven't developed a specific process. And so I think, Ted, that's a great reminder.
Yeah, thank you, Ted. Looks like Will has a comment.
Yeah, I thought this might be a little helpful for everybody. When I was thinking about involvement in this project and thinking about the scale of this and what the potential would be, 700 acres about for the prison site, I tried to overlay that with and compare it to something that I was familiar with and had worked with, and at my time at Salt Lake City particularly. If you overlaid 700 acres over, say, downtown Salt Lake City, that would extend from about 3rd West to 4th East and from about North Temple to 9th South. You think about what's in that area, downtown Salt Lake City. You've got the potential to do something like that on a site of this size here at the prison. And that makes you start to think about some of the things that might be possible and that you can do.
Good perspective. Yeah.
Might I just add to Wilf's comment, and I think to some degree Ted's as well. I did the same thing as Wilf did, kind of overlaid what 700 acres looks like, and it does encompass kind of the greater downtown area. But you look at the connectivity, how many streets there are going north, south, and east, west, and we tend to think of connectivity in terms of mostly the regional connections. But if we were to look at the intersection density that you have downtown and compare that to the intersection density of some of our suburban regional shopping centers and things like that, the intersection density is what addresses congestion. It's not the capacity of the roads as much as it is the intersection of densities that get people coming and going, whether they're making long trips through an area or short trips, a few blocks to go to lunch or, you know, to go to an appointment or whatever it happens to be. And if we were to, and a lot of people would even say Salt Lake City's intersection density is pretty low compared to standards of other major metropolitan districts. You know, Alan, you shared in your overview of the regional vision, that historic kind of aerial view of Salt Lake City that showed the grid of streets, north, south, and east, west. And I think that's something we should be aiming for. In addition to the regional map that shows the major arteries, is really thinking about what an overlay of a grid looks like, that really begins to address how you connect things together, that works well for bicyclists and pedestrians and creates real visual interest, in addition to addressing the transportation needs. I think that's the kind of transportation system that we should be looking at very quickly. Beyond the regional connectivity is kind of that sub-region kind of district connectivity that Ted talked about.
If I can jump in maybe on just what Soren's saying, and then even reflect back on what Steve Kellenberger said about transportation being I've always went by the philosophy that is expressed in Alex Marshall's book about transportation, that your transportation system is the skeleton on which your urban area takes its form. And, we would not do badly by just, say, overlaying this site, at least a good part of it, with a grid street pattern, and then having development take place within that grid. I mean, that's what Salt Lake City is. And there's certainly a lot of good that's been happened in downtown Salt Lake City with an urban grid street pattern. So something that wouldn't hurt to contemplate.
Well, and that was kind of the approach with Daybreak. You look at the grid within the Daybreak, it's much larger. Don's familiar with this. It's much larger development than we're looking at here. It breaks down a little bit at some of the edges because it's still focusing on arterials that connect beyond. And I think that's an area that we can kind of learn some lessons that Ted talked about. But how that grid extends out into Bluffdale and Riverton and Draper and Lehigh and other places, I think becomes the real magic of setting up a transportation system that will extend well beyond the land uses. Land uses come and go in sometimes a generation or two. The transportation network, you can look at cities that are 1,000 years old, and the street network hasn't changed much, even as the buildings and infrastructure and uses change dramatically over a period of time.
Soren, I just to comment on the Daybreak comment, I think one of the reasons that Daybreak worked so well is that we weren't hung up on intersections only being vehicular intersections too.
Right.
That an intersection can be a pedestrian opportunity or bicycle opportunity, or there's lots of forms of transportation that all work together very, very well if you're prepared to include them. So I'm all in favor of a grid as a start, but I think there are some existing constraints that are huge. You're not going to move rail lines, for example, and things like that. And so morphing the grid to create intimacy in some places and considering those constraints, I think ends up being practically the best solution. You mentioned that transportation improvements, they're so expensive, they end up being there forever. Buildings can change what use happens in them and that kind of thing, but once you put something on the ground in terms of infrastructure, it's very hard to move it after the fact. So I don't disagree with starting off with a grid, but I said don't hesitate to tinker with it and deal with the other constraints and create some uniqueness. I mean, that's what makes nooks and crannies are what make places special.
I'm going to build on this by suggesting that as we go through this process, we keep in mind the balance that this site can offer in terms of the usages that are internal to the site and then its relationship to the broader region. This is certainly true for transportation, but if the site can be developed in terms of its design and intended uses, that it provides for the possibility for a lot of the activity to happen just within the site, internal capture within the center, that it really functions as a multi-use center for people to live in, to work in, to play in, to shop in, and then the way we facilitate that is, of course, with a mix of land uses, a mix of housing choices, and then that internal connectivity that many of us have been talking about here, that we should be intentional about providing for that. And then also recognize that it is going to be a regional hub or center that draws people in from elsewhere. And we have to be thinking at every stage of this about that balance. And on the transportation piece specifically, I feel like we are all assuming this, but let's just state it as clearly that the site for regional connectivity has to be served through multiple modes of transportation. That people have to be able to access this site, and not just the site, but the destinations they're trying to reach within the site, be it a job or whatever. They have to be able to get there through not just driving, but also through really, Alan, to use the statute's term, world-class transit. Because one of the biggest concerns that people have had about the development of the site generally is the impacts it's going to have on traffic congestion and on air quality. Well, there's a way for this site to actually be helpful in that regard. Utah being the fastest growing state in the nation over the past decade or so, it's going to keep growing. We will keep growing. And if we can provide people the ability to live, work, and play within this site, that helps on traffic congestion and air quality. And if people are coming to the site, if they can get there in a way that is other than driving, or particularly driving alone. So if there are those world-class transit connections and then connectivity using transit or circulators or walking or biking within the site, then that will really help us as well to achieve the promise of the site in a way that has better, more positive impacts, as Ted was saying, on the surrounding communities and even on the whole region. I think that this, what I'm talking about here, this balance, is something that is hardwired into the objectives here, but I figure, given this is the first meeting of this particular group, let's state it as a clear objective that we're working for when we talk about infrastructure and land use.
Al, did you want to add your comment?
Yeah, I think just maybe to piggyback a little bit on what Andrew was saying, I hit my send button about the same time he started talking, but you know, we can overlay as much internal infrastructure as you want, but the way that interacts with the existing surrounding community will kind of dictate how accepted this development will be and how much traffic and interest it will bring into it. So you can't overlay a system on top of it that will completely not work with the existing system. You have to meld that so that Bluffdale, Draper, Lehigh can all kind of interact with this site on the fringes, so that it can bring it in, and not just from a transit perspective, but from a utility perspective. You know, making sure that all of those things meet your needs, but interact with the fringe appropriately. This isn't a place, it's a blank canvas, but it's blank in the middle of an existing canvas. So the way that you are planning this, this just piggybacks onto a lot of what Andrew just said. You have to blend both those internal and external things.
Looks like Ross, as you want to.
Yeah, I guess just, you know, what Andrew and Kyle both said, totally agree. We have a ton of growth in Lehigh, and everyone wants more density, and you know, we may or may not have tracks here someday, hopefully. So I guess Manjeet, all you really need to know if you're new is that you spend all your money in Lehigh. But yeah, internal capture seems to be king. You know, if we give people the opportunities to do what they need to do close by, then, you know, then all that external stuff, you know, while it's still very critical and important, becomes less so, because then people can actually live there and work there. You know, to me, it's maybe the difference between something like Daybreak or Harriman. You know, lots of nice places to live in Harriman, but nothing else. So you got to drive far, whereas Daybreak has some more options. So anyway, just, yeah, agree.
Ross, you already have UDOT spending all of their money in Lehigh. Do you need UTA to do it?
Yes. Yeah, we're very high maintenance here.
Jim, Allen, let me throw out one other. You guys may be looking at some case studies as you're moving forward with this. I thought it would be worth a little history of the last time we relocated the state prison, which happens to be where Sugar House Park is located, and Highland High School in Salt Lake City. And interestingly, the Sugar House area has gone through enormous densification. We've added thousands of new housing units with very little additional impact on traffic and congestion. And part of that's, I think a significant part of that is because we have, I think 6 or 7 bus routes that run through the kind of the greater Sugar House area from 7th East up to about 17th East, East West and North South. And we also have the more recent addition of the Sugar House South Salt Lake S-Line streetcar, which didn't carry a lot of traffic when it was first opened in 2013, but ridership has grown significantly as housing density has been added along that line in South Salt Lake and Salt Lake City. And so, I think that's a real success story. But the fact that we have this enormous regional park right in the heart of a growing and urbanizing area, it provides the backyard, if you will, to a lot of new housing that's being added. And the demand, it's not affordable housing, it's pretty high income housing that's serving downtown and the university and Sugar House and other nearby employment centers. But it's I think an emerging case study of a real success story of how you do infill. That it went through a transition of a kind of a suburban shopping mall that did add a lot of congestion, but the redevelopment of that shopping mall that's happening now is really demonstrating how to infill with transportation systems that support the infill in ways that don't affect surrounding neighborhoods, which are not seeing huge increase in negative impacts and have benefited from a lot of the infrastructure and open space, green space, trails, and other things that have been added in to support those neighborhoods as well. So that might be a valuable case study to look at.
That's great. Thanks.
I don't see any other comments. Does anybody else have anything they want to add?
Yeah, Jim, this is Hugh.
Go ahead.
This is Hugh with WFRC, and this is a piggybacking comment on a lot of things that have been mentioned. But we see right now with the impacts of the pandemic in several cities around the world, including many in the US, how cities are rethinking their existing street systems and who those streets are serving. And we've hit on this a little bit, but I certainly would want us to learn from what's happened in other cities, and maybe not go through the same growing pains as far as making sure we are designing the streets for people. And a lot of cities are repurposing their streets right now on a temporary and leading to permanent basis. And so just making sure we take note of some of the growing pains those cities have gone through, and maybe we can avoid that a little bit going into the future, and make sure we jump to best practices now rather than having to learn from our own mistakes. We can learn from other people. Thanks.
Any other comments? Thank you for all of your input and comments. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, a lot of coordination, you can tell, but we've got all the right people here, along with the team that we'll hire to make that happen. Maybe, Alan, unless you object, we can move to the question of what are the next steps for this group, and how do we proceed, and where do we go from here?
That'd be great. I'll just some background. I think we've kind of laid out generally the role of this group, bringing your expertise, many years of experience, to help us avoid some of the mistakes that may have been made in the past, and look out ahead to make sure that this is a development that will do those things you've talked about, fit within the broader region, be forward-looking, be flexible enough to incorporate changes in technologies, transportation modes, et cetera. And I think you've provided some good ideas. We want to make sure that we use your time meaningfully. And at this point, we're generally thinking that we'll take the ideas that are generated, capture them, organize them a little bit, then work with you to kind of identify, as I said, a handful of priorities, things that would fit within the RFP at least first. But we also want to be thinking beyond that to the master plan itself. And while we won't be asking you to put pen to paper in drafting it, we will want you to be reviewing concepts and helping to identify challenges. So in terms of next steps, I guess I'd be open to your ideas on what you think would be valuable for us to get to you, and thoughts you have on how we can use your time most effectively. Or if what I've outlined can be improved upon, and I know it can.
Alan, I'll go ahead and jump in. I wonder, this is a large group and we have varying levels of expertise on different things. I'm wondering, as the land use plans or as the infrastructure plans and other things start coming to fruition, if even this group doesn't get cut down into smaller subgroups that can look at certain parts of infrastructure and pitch in there. Sometimes I find that having some smaller subgroups can work a little bit easier, and you can drill down a little bit more if you do that. Just a suggestion.
No, I think it's a good one. It's certainly one that we've been talking about with other groups, and probably this one too. And we want to be respectful of your time. But yes, some of you will be more focused on transportation, some more on infrastructure, some more on land use. And so we probably won't have everybody look at everything. So I think you're right on, Kyle. Thanks.
Hey, Alan.
Yeah, I had the same thought as Kyle did, to kind of break it into groups, and I could see maybe a half dozen or so. Land use could maybe include components of residential, mixed use, even open space, as a land use, which I think is a really valuable land use that often gets overlooked. Infrastructure could include transportation, active transportation as a subset. Utilities, especially stormwater and waste, some of those things. So those might be a few headings for some subgroups to think about.
Alan, I'll if I can, I'll kind of flip your question around a little bit, in that I think we'd also want to know how we can be most helpful to you and what you need from us. And one of the things that I would suggest as we, and I'll say particularly the transportation agencies, one of the things we'll have to remind ourselves of is, as we are engaging in our processes and our work, I think that we need to treat Point of the Mountain, sort of operationally think of Point of the Mountain as its own city. Now, I mean, I say this with the very clear understanding that the area is within Draper City, but you are a key stakeholder. And so just as if we were going to be working on plans or projects and we'd be working with Mayor Walker or David or the folks at Draper City, we need to be thinking about engaging you and your team, Steve and Alan and Muriel and the team in the work that we do. So, it's not just that we would look to you to schedule meetings for us and bring us together, but we would look to bring you into our conversations and meetings as well. So that can work in both directions.
I appreciate that, Andrew, and I think you've been good at that, and I'd love for that to continue, because communication is going to be key here. The governor always says that when we have problems, it's almost always a matter of failure to communicate. Of course, when he does it in the voice of the guard in Cool Hand Luke. I don't know. What we have here is a failure to communicate. Now, we thought you could see the governor do that, but the point is real. We need to make sure that we're reaching out and communicating honestly and openly. Part of the challenge, and I'll just be direct about it, is that as the only employee, I'm stretched pretty thin and covering a lot of bases. And if I have to manage, 12 subgroups instead of 5 working groups, that's going to be a lot tougher. I'm trying to keep minutes and make sure that we're moving ahead. So we're going to be balancing a little bit resources with what we're trying to accomplish. But I'm grateful to have additional help now on the consulting side.
So Alan, maybe I can throw something out there as we look towards getting an RFP out for our master planning consultant who can bring all of this information, great information and planning that's already happened together. It seems to me like one of our next things that we need to accomplish is, as we put out that RFP, we need to provide the teams that are going to propose all the information that's already been put together, right? And compile that together to give to them for their presentations and proposals going forward. So maybe a good next step would be coming up with a way to compile all the great information that's already been worked on and already put together. And maybe that's a small subgroup that can work with Stephen and kind of put that all together.
That's an important point, Jim. We do need to be able to collect the relevant regional data and be able to make some determinations about what is valuable to a planning team and not overwhelm them, but at the same time make sure that they know the context in which they're operating. So that's a terrific point, and maybe we ought to charge this group with thinking about plans that you have right now that would be relevant, and we'll kind of collect those and vet them a little bit and decide what would be included in the RFP process.
Hey, Alan, I'm not sure if I'm on mute or not.
No, I can hear you.
I just have a related question, and that is, how are you all set up for modeling? Is there a regional traffic model that, or is there a whole bunch of individuals models? Because that would be, obviously a part of the scope for the transportation consultant to utilize and bolt into that model.
I'd let the MPOs answer that question. Andrew,
Ted, you want to take that?
I will. We have a travel demand model that serves both the Mountain Land area as well as the Wasatch Front Regional Council area. So it's going to cover all of Salt Lake County and Utah County as a regional model. And then there is a land use model that works with that, that approximates the decision making of the real estate market. So we call it a real estate market model. It's based on an urban sim platform, and they speak to each other. So you could use both, or you could just use the travel model, or as you see fit. And we can give you more details on that.
Is there a name for the travel demand model, or you just call it the travel demand model?
We just call it the travel demand model.
Okay. Perfect.
And Steve, it is customary for us to work with communities and consulting teams and everything to coordinate that the modeling work. And so I'm glad you brought this up. And this would be something that we should definitely have more conversation about, how what the expectations are in the scope for what the consultants will do and what our agencies will do, but we will definitely be happy to partner closely on modeling various scenarios and as we go forward here.
So you all would be the first line of coordination on that.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think that there's probably, looking at my list, probably a 4 or 5 person group that could represent all of the infrastructure information that would be critical. So maybe that helps us to divide this group down a little bit, but to your point, Alan, I'm not sure that myself or Mayor Walker have a lot of time to devote to be heavily involved in a bunch of smaller groups as well. So we need to be sensitive and careful with that a little bit, that we get spread too thin.
What if we created a short maybe input form and get it out to everyone, get their concept of vision for what they think the site should look like, and then get their concept of vision for what transportation, what everyone thinks it should look like. And then let's, from there, we can kind of get an idea what people are thinking. We could sort of formulate, maybe there's some new things or some new concepts, but if everyone had a chance to sort of write out their vision, what they think the transportation part should look like, and then maybe a third section for, issues they think that we ought to always keep our mind on that are from their unique perspectives and expertise. What issues, maybe 3 or 4 or 5, not a huge document, but succinctly give us your vision, the transportation issues as you see it, and maybe 3 or 4 of the significant issues you want us to keep in the forefront. We could compile that, and then in our next meeting, maybe we divide up and try and formulate some groups, as to how to address those issues.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. I've put up on the screen contact information that you can use, primarily that email address, info@thepointutah.org, and we can collect those ideas if you want to just send it in a quick email. You can also contact me directly, Alan Matheson at utah.gov, or I'm going to give you my phone number here. It's 801-554-5496. So 801-554-5496. And
hey, Alan, could I make a suggestion?
Sure.
Rather than that was a brave brave offering you just made.
Only because I trust the group.
But I was thinking, we were talking earlier before the meeting about coming up with some mechanism for input from the working group. It might be easier to summarize and to frame up if there was a standard format for doing that. So what if we were to just gin up something very simple and send out to everybody to then input into? So then when we summarize it, it's can be some similar categories and structure.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with that. I just wanted to give everybody an option if they wanted to talk to me directly or ask some other questions. But yes, I think you're right on, Stephen, and Mayor Walker said the same thing, that we can kind of put together a form and get that out. Great idea.
I think that sounds like a great idea and a great direction. Do we have anything else to address in this meeting, Alan?
I think that covers it. I just want to thank you for spending the time on this. I really am aware of how busy all of you are. We view this as a statewide project. Your expertise matters. Will make a difference. I don't have the expertise. Our board is terrific, but they're not planners, and so getting your input to do something that I think will make a difference in our region for generations is something we hope you're excited about, but something we also very much appreciate.
I'd agree with Alan. I can sense the enthusiasm a lot of you have and the excitement and a lot of work that's gone in so far to get to this point, and we just want to pick up that ball and keep moving it forward in an organized way and do what's right for this, for the point of the mountain and the community there. But thank you all for your participation as well. Mayor Walker.
I think it's a good time to say motion to adjourn.
I don't think we need a motion, but I like the adjourn part.
Let's create that form and get it out and get some input back, and then we can plan our next approach.
Sounds great. Thank you, everybody.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Everyone.